Today, we're going to be talking about the killing of Ken McElroy. This necessarily includes mention of abuse and of violence against women and children. If this will be upsetting for you, please stop listening now. Humans are builders by nature. We make places and systems that help us and help each other to feel safe and to live productive, happy lives. One could even make the argument that much of human history has been the story of us finding and refining those systems and, unfortunately, having to struggle against retrogressive forces who would instead see those systems degraded. The story of Ken McElroy is a story of when those systems fail, when someone is more concerned with themselves than with those around them, more concerned with pushing people down than lifting them up. The systems we built failed to protect the people of Skidmore, Missouri. Ultimately, they had to protect themselves. Here's what happened. Kenneth Rex McElroy was born in Skidmore, in Nottoway County, on the 1st of June, 1934. He was born to a poor farming family and was the 15th of 16 children. At the time, Skidmore had less than 500 residents, and many of them were struggling. Ken's family was certainly no exception. He dropped out of school at 15, and by all accounts, he was largely illiterate. But even before he dropped out, he was committing crimes. He started with theft and other minor crimes of youth when he was 12 or 13 years old, and he never really stopped. As Ken grew older, he got bigger, much bigger. In a town of 500 people, it's possible that he was the most intimidating among them. At 6'3" and 270 pounds, with thick dark hair and large sideburns, he was a frightening figure for many of the townsfolk, and he often used that to his advantage. Even from a young age, he wasn't afraid to use his size and willingness for violence to get what he wanted. Ken first got married when he was 18. His wife, Sharon, was 16. That would make her one of the oldest women that he would pursue over the years. In fact, Ken never stopped grooming and preying on young girls, even when he was married. It was a well-known matter of fact that he liked girls around the age of 12 or 13 and actively pursued relationships with them. As the years went on, McElroy was accused of raping 2 women, one of them only 14, and later, through powers of fear, coercion, and intimidation, forcing both of those women to marry him. It's unclear how legitimate any of those marriages were, since they were often overlapping each other. But we'll get to that more later. As a grown man, Ken's primary concerns in Nottoway County and the way he made his living was through theft. He had multiple side jobs as well. He would sometimes trade antiques or raise and train hunting dogs. But it's believed Ken McElroy was responsible for the vast majority of both cattle and pig thefts in the entire county. And these trades were not all separate from each other. The antiques that he sold were often things he had stolen. In short, he would do just about anything that would make him $1, and the less work he had to do to make that dollar, the better. Of course, as time went on, he would get caught. Over and over again, in fact. As years passed, Ken caught over 50 felony charges, but he didn't spend a single night in prison over it. He had hired a man named Richard Gene McFadden as his lawyer. McElroy would often brag to people that McFadden was a mob lawyer and knew all the tricks to help keep someone out of jail. And while it's not clear if McFadden actually worked for the mob, the rest of it is almost certainly true. McFadden would say that Ken caught charges about 3 times per year, and they had developed a system for how to handle it. McFadden would use every trick in the book to get the trials delayed and pushed back as far as he could, and McElroy would take that extra time and use it for intimidation. In such a small county, it wasn't hard to find jurors or witnesses or lawyers, and find out about them. It wasn't hard to show up outside their houses and wait for hours, staring. It wasn't hard to fire your gun in the air in the middle of the night, to terrify them, to stalk them, to outright threaten them. And they had every reason to believe that McElroy was capable of carrying out these threats. In July of 1976, Ken was hunting pheasant. The problem was he was doing it out of season, on land that wasn't his to hunt on. The owner of the land, a farmer named Romaine Henry, came down and kindly asked Ken to stop. He didn't want to get in trouble for out-of-season hunting on his lands, and he was uncomfortable with the whole thing. Ken shot Romaine Henry in the stomach with a shotgun. And though Henry lived through the ordeal, Ken never saw the inside of a jail cell about it. One local highway patrolman, Richard Stratton, had many encounters with McElroy. So much so that McElroy, tired of it, started to threaten Stratton's home and family. One day Stratton's wife, Margaret, was getting into her car to go to church on Sunday morning, and McElroy walked up to the car and put a shotgun in her face. The county magistrate at the time, Montgomery Wilson, was so scared of McElroy that he wouldn't even take the cases against him. He would have them moved to neighboring counties or even just dismissed instead. That is to say, the police, the courts, every system that was in place to control a man like Ken McElroy and keep him from harming the people of Skidmore, it had failed. And while Ken McElroy was not what you or I might recognize as wealthy, he was very likely the most economically powerful man in Nottoway County. No, he wasn't living in a mansion or driving a Rolls-Royce, but he always had money. And he always had a way of getting what he needed to get. In such a small town with so many people struggling, that has a kind of power that comes with it as well. As sure as the power of the shotgun he seemed to favor. I tell you all of this so that you understand the helplessness people felt in McElroy preying on their children. He liked young girls, and he would stalk and abuse them. He was often married, but always had multiple so-called girlfriends, and over time he fathered 10 children, many of them with underage girls. Trina McLeod was 14 when she married McElroy. She was his third wife. She had his child shortly after their marriage, and as soon as she did, she tried to flee to her parents' home. McElroy allegedly responded by burning down her parents' house and shooting her dog. I say allegedly because a later quote from Trina herself in 1981 would attribute the fire to faulty wiring. However, it's unclear what actually happened, as all reports of this event are flawed in a number of ways. Trina was a long-term victim of extreme domestic abuse and would continue to defend McElroy until the day she died. To quote Trina, "Ken was totally different from the way they're saying he was now. Oh, he was wild, but he wasn't guilty of all those things they say. He was honest and generous. I never knew him to steal anything, ever." It is not uncommon among long-term victims of abuse, however, to defend their abuser. By 1980, it was safe to say that the town of Skidmore was under Ken McElroy's thumb. He had the money, the power. He was morally bankrupt, manipulative, and willing to work incredible violence for very little reason. With his fancy lawyer at his side, and many years of being unpunished behind him, he didn't fear the police. He didn't fear the law, and he was confident that he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. The residents of Skidmore had been abandoned. On April 25th, 1980, the clerk at the Bowenkamp General Store on the main street of Skidmore asked McElroy's daughter, Tanya, to return a piece of candy that she hadn't paid for. This was all it took. McElroy was so incensed by this perceived insult to his overfilled ego that he began to stalk and intimidate the entire Bowenkamp family. This culminated in the events of July 8th of that year, where McElroy drove into the alley behind the Bowenkamp General Store. He met the owner there, Ernest Bowenkamp, and threatened him. When that didn't pan out how McElroy wanted, he shot Ernest in the neck at close range with a shotgun. Miraculously, Ernest Bowenkamp survived. As a result, McElroy was arrested and charged with attempted murder. The trial was originally set for August of 1980, but McElroy's fast-talking attorney did his job. He got the trial pushed to June of 1981 instead. The idea was that this would give McElroy plenty of time to intimidate the Bowenkamp family, to sow fear, and to make a conviction unlikely. One member of the Bowenkamp family had this to say: "You can't know how intimidating it was after that. Before his trial, he'd drive up to our house in his pickup at night and just sit there. Sometimes he would fire his gun. It was frightening." What happened instead of McElroy intimidating the entire town into complete submission was that the prosecuting attorney of the case resigned. A new, young prosecutor named David Baird was brought in. Some speculate that this was directly caused by McElroy and his intimidating manner. Baird was only 3 years out of law school and inexperienced, but he was the first and only person to ever get a conviction against McElroy. It was something no other lawyer had ever managed. Unfortunately, in order to do it, he had to reduce the charges to secure the conviction. Instead of attempted murder, McElroy was found guilty of second-degree assault. Of the result, McElroy said this: "The jury convicted me, and they gave me 2 years, but I'll tell you what, I'll never go to jail. I'll appeal and get off. I've been fighting the law since I was 13, and I'm damn near 50. I've been arrested for over 53 felonies, and this is the first one I ever lost." If shooting someone in the throat, point blank, with a shotgun is not an attempt at murder, I don't know what is, so it's understandable to be disappointed with that outcome. But Baird had still done something no one before him could do. Attempted murder charges are much harder to prove in court than assault charges, so he went for what he viewed as the sure thing. Was it the correct move? Who can say? But it did lead directly to what comes next. McElroy was right. The maximum sentence was 2 years, and he was freed on bail of $40,000 pending his appeal. The very day he was freed, he was spotted in the D&G Tavern, the local bar, carrying a rifle and a bayonet and making graphically violent threats about murdering Ernest Bowenkamp. He was quickly arrested, and then almost immediately released. The only consequence? The postponement of his trial for violating his bail provisions. On July 10th of 1981, there was a meeting at the town's Legion Hall, which was just down the street from both the D&G Tavern and the Bowenkamp General Store. The purpose of this meeting was to discuss Ken McElroy and how to stop him from causing any more harm. Both the town mayor and Sheriff Dan Estes were in attendance. In fact, as many as 60 residents of Skidmore attended that meeting as well. Now that might not sound like such a high number, but remember, Skidmore only had 500 residents. Accounting for children, those who were working or unable to attend, 60 people represents a huge portion of the entire town. The mood of attendees was dire, frustrated, boiling over with fear and anger. Suggestions like those of the sheriff that the citizens take it upon themselves to form a neighborhood watch did very little to appease the crowd. To quote one attendant, "We simply felt the system had failed us. We all knew what McElroy was like, and there he was, again and again. That seemed like nobody could stop him." And who could blame them for feeling that way? While this meeting was going on, word reached them that McElroy and his wife Trina were spotted heading into the D&G Tavern down the street for drinks. The meeting adjourned. All 60 attendants left in a crowd, headed down to the tavern, and they surrounded and flanked McElroy's truck while he was inside. Some of them even went into the bar and waited for him to finish. When McElroy and Trina came out, they got into their truck, Trina into the passenger seat just beside her husband. McElroy lit a cigarette. Trina would claim to have looked over her shoulder at the crowd just in time to see a man grab a rifle from the back of the truck. She saw him take aim, and multiple shots were fired. Trina dove from the truck and took cover. A local man, Jack Clement, grabbed her and escorted her away to the local bank and to safety. McElroy was 47 when he was killed, shot twice, in the driver's seat of his own truck, in front of his wife and 60 other people. Despite Trina's claim that one man had done this, bullet casings from 2 separate guns were later found at the scene. More notably, despite 60 witnesses, not a single person called an ambulance for Ken McElroy. In the investigation that followed, there were no witnesses to the killing except for Trina. Despite the presence of 60 people, all of whom were directly watching what was happening, not a single one would say what had happened. They had all seen nothing that day. No one knew, it seemed, who had shot McElroy. Cheryl Houston, the daughter of Ernest Bowenkamp, had seen the entire thing from the window of her family's store. When later asked, she would say this: "Once the shroud of silence fell, there was going to be no one talking. They could have pushed and dug, and gotten nothing. We were so bitter and got so angry at the law letting us down that it came to somebody taking matters into their own hands." The only one who claimed to have seen who shot McElroy was Trina. She identified the shooter as Del Clement, part owner of the D&G Tavern. However, Clement denied being the shooter, and no other witnesses would confirm that they had even seen him there. When no one else would come forward and say that Del had even been at the meeting that day, the DA declined to press any charges. The local Major Cases Squad and the FBI both investigated the killing. 3 grand juries ended up hearing evidence about McElroy's death, but no one was ever indicted for the murder. Trina McLeod, however, filed a $6 million wrongful death lawsuit against the town of Skidmore, Nottoway County, Sheriff Dan Estes, Mayor Steve Peters, and Del Clement. The case was settled out of court for just over $17,000. Trina left town and got remarried. And in 2012, she passed on her 55th birthday. As recently as 2006, Nottoway County Sheriff Ben Espay had this to say: "They all seem to know who did it, but they don't want to get involved. I'll do everything in my power to arrest the person." Nothing came of it. Del Clement passed away in 2009, having denied any role in the shooting right up until his death. In all those years, no other name was ever seriously put forward as the shooter, and no explanation was ever really given for where the second set of shell casings had come from. Though Trina would go to her grave claiming that Ken McElroy was honest and not a thief, it's notable that in the month following his death, the number of cattle and pig thefts in Nottoway County dropped dramatically. Vigilante justice is a slippery slope and a hard line to walk. On the one hand, a man was butchered in the street, and no one faced consequences for it. That erodes the principle of justice as a whole. But on the other hand, what were the people of Skidmore to do? Their judges, their lawyers, their police and sheriffs had all failed them. In the wake of incredible violence in broad daylight, Sheriff Dan Estes had suggested the people take up a neighborhood watch. But McElroy wouldn't have cared about that. He wasn't scared of the police, and he surely wasn't frightened of a few citizens patrolling the streets or peeping out their windows. If anything, McElroy wanted them to see what he was doing. He wanted them to see he was above the law. Because he was. In principle, one must condemn vigilante killings. After all, we see every day the consequences of people who are unfit for power having too much of it. You could look to government, certainly, but chances are you don't need to look further than the worst manager you've ever had at your job or the board of your local homeowners association to see how little power it takes to bring out the cruelty in small-minded people. But here, in this case, can the people of Skidmore really be blamed for taking matters into their own hands when no one else would help them? Let me know what you think. Thank you for listening. This has been A Troubled Past. If you'd like to hear more stories like this one, please subscribe and follow us on social media. And please, let me know if there are any other stories that you'd like to hear covered in this way.